Prepare to unlearn. There is an idea almost everyone accepts without questioning, the idea that you live in a democracy, that power belongs to the people, that your voice matters, that voting means deciding. But what if none of this is exactly true? What if the democracy you were taught to defend is very different from the democracy that actually operates in the real world? What if the problem isn't that democracy is in crisis, but that it was never what you were told it was? If these questions already make you uncomfortable, subscribe to the channel, because this space isn't about reassuring you. It's about showing you what usually stays outside the frame. Let's continue. You vote. You press a button, you choose a name, the votes are counted. A winner takes office, and the system tells you democracy works. But there's a detail almost never mentioned. Between the moment you vote and the moment real decisions are made, there is a vast space, a silent space, a space where power moves without asking for your opinion. That's where democracy starts to feel strange, because voting is not the same as deciding. It never was. You choose people, not limits. You don't choose structures. You don't choose which interests are untouchable. You authorize someone to operate a system that existed long before your vote and will continue long after it. That is not a technical detail. That is the core of the problem. Modern democracy works far more like a system of permission than a system of real power. You can participate as long as you don't cross certain boundaries. You can disagree as long as you don't threaten central interests. You can protest as long as nothing essential changes. And when something does change, it's usually because someone allowed it. If you've ever felt that something about this doesn't add up, leave a like. Not just for the algorithm, but because this kind of conversation only grows when more people are willing to question the stories they were taught. Because from here on, things get more uncomfortable. Participation is constantly encouraged. Public hearings, consultations, panels, committees. Everything looks democratic. Everything feels inclusive, but almost none of it is binding. Most decisions are already made before the public is invited into the room. Participation becomes a performance, a way to legitimize outcomes, not shape them. And this creates a strange feeling. You feel present but powerless, heard but ignored, involved but irrelevant. This feeling isn't personal, it's structural. When people say democracy is in crisis, they usually blame polarization, social media, or extremism. But those are symptoms, not causes. The deeper cause is this quiet realization. The system doesn't respond the way it promised it would. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to say out loud. Modern democracy was designed to coexist with unequal power, not eliminate it. On paper, everyone is equal. In reality, some voices carry far more weight than others. And this isn't about opinions, it's about money, access, influence, pressure. While you vote every few years, other actors influence decisions every single day. Banks, corporations, investment funds, entire economic sectors that don't need to persuade voters, they just need to apply pressure. Governments learn this quickly, anger the market, and consequences are immediate. Capital leaves, interest rates rise, crises are announced. Anger the public, and the effects are slower, weaker, and often manageable. That's why you hear this phrase so often. This isn't a political choice, it's an economic necessity. The moment someone says that, democracy has been sidelined. Because if there is no choice, there is no decision. And if there is no decision, there is no popular power. What remains is technical management of interests no one elected. Maybe you're thinking now, so what's the point of voting? It legitimizes the system. It maintains the feeling of participation. It changes faces without changing structures. It provides stability. And here's the uncomfortable question. Stability for whom? Because if you look closely, democracy works very well for some people. It protects predictability. It preserves continuity. It ensures that deep changes are rare, slow, and always negotiated with those who already hold power. That's not a flaw. That's selective efficiency. When this efficiency starts to frustrate large parts of society, the system reacts, not by changing its structure, but by changing the narrative. The problem becomes the uninformed voter, the radicalized public, the divided society, never the design itself. And this is where authoritarian figures emerge, not because people hate democracy, but because they've lost faith in a democracy that never delivers real power. Authoritarianism doesn't appear out of nowhere. It fills the vacuum left by unfulfilled promises. If this is making sense so far, share this video, not to convince anyone, but to provoke reflection. Because these conversations rarely happen where they matter most. Democracy isn't a permanent state. It's not a trophy. It's not something you have forever. Real democracy is constant tension, conflict, pressure, discomfort. When democracy becomes too comfortable, someone has lost power, and it's almost never those at the top. That's why functional democracies are rare. They impose real limits on economic power. They demand transparency that makes elites uncomfortable. They require participation that cannot be ignored, and that creates instability, resistance, conflict. The system prefers to avoid all of that, so it offers something easier, controlled, predictable. A democracy that looks alive but runs on autopilot. You vote, they decide. At some point, you face a choice. Cynicism or awareness. Cynicism says nothing matters. Everything is manipulated. Participation is pointless. Awareness says something harder. Understand where power really is so you can challenge it. That takes effort. It creates discomfort. It leads to conflict. But it's the only path forward, because democracy doesn't start with voting. Voting is just a tool. Democracy starts when you understand who decides, how they decide, and who they answer to. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Once you reach this point of understanding, something shifts. You can't pretend you don't see it anymore. You can't accept simple explanations for structural problems, and you can't keep believing that everything will be fixed in the next election. Democracy starts to look less like a guaranteed right and more like a permanent battleground, and that's unsettling, because it means no one is going to hand you power willingly. No system corrects itself out of kindness. No elite gives up privilege without pressure. It means realizing that when people say democracy is safe, they're usually talking about the safety of rules, not the safety of lives. The stability of institutions, not the effectiveness of participation. The continuity of the system, not its capacity to change. That's how democracy can survive on paper while disappearing in everyday life. Elections continue, speeches continue, symbols continue. But the most important decisions drift further and further away from the majority. Everything looks normal, and that's exactly why the process works so well. Because democracies rarely collapse in dramatic fashion. They don't usually end with tanks in the streets. They hollow out slowly, when voting no longer changes direction, when participation becomes theater, when questioning the system is treated as a threat. And when someone points this out, the response is predictable. You're attacking democracy. No, questioning how power actually operates is not an attack on democracy. It's the only way to take it seriously. If you've made it this far, like this video now, not as agreement with an opinion, but as a signal that this kind of thinking deserves space. Systems don't fear blind opposition. They fear informed awareness, because the real danger to any system isn't criticism, it's passive acceptance. And this may be the core issue. The democracy you were taught is too comfortable. It demands very little. It doesn't require constant vigilance. It doesn't expect confrontation. It just asks you to trust. But real democracy doesn't ask for blind trust. It demands attention. It demands organization. It demands pressure. It demands that you recognize the difference between being represented and being managed. This doesn't mean abandoning voting. It means stopping the fantasy that voting is the end of the process. Voting is the beginning and often the smallest part. Everything else happens outside the ballot box, in accountability, in resistance, in refusing simplified answers, and above all, in unlearning what was made convenient for you to believe. Because at its core, democracy isn't about choosing who rules, it's about limiting who rules, and that rarely happens without conflict. Now, if this perspective resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. This space isn't about selling easy hope or feeding cynicism. It's about giving you the tools to understand power as it actually functions, not as it's marketed. Share this video with someone who still believes democracy is just pressing a button every few years. Not to convince them, but to plant a question, because everything starts there. With the question no one likes to answer, who decides when no one is voting? And now that you know the answer isn't simple, isn't comfortable, and isn't innocent, there's only one honest conclusion left. Prepare to unlearn.